And she did not deserve what happened to her. It was despicable. It's still despicable. And these people walk around and trying to defend these folks. And you have no idea.
The final suspect charged in connection to the murder of a 22-year-old Murfreesboro woman just pled guilty. Lamira Pipkins will spend the next 20 years in prison for the facilitation of first-degree murder. She helped kill Mya Fuller back in July of 2022. Police say Fuller was last seen working at an event at Geodis Park in Nashville. Her body was found days later in Wilson County with several gunshot wounds.
A car sits alone in a nightclub parking lot in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a gray 2020 Toyota Camry. The engine is cold. The doors are locked. No one has claimed it in days. Inside a home in Murfreesboro, a family waits by the phone. Their daughter never came home from a night out. She was supposed to text when she got in. She never did. They don't know it yet, but the answer to where she is will not come from a hospital or a friend's couch or a missed flight. It will come, a week later, from a wooded property in the next county over, where two people who had just bought the land will notice a smell in the air and the sight of birds circling above the trees. This is the story of Mya Fuller, a 22-year-old woman from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, whose disappearance in the summer of 2022 would take investigators nearly a year to unravel, and whose case would end not with a dramatic trial, but with a series of guilty pleas that closed one of the most painstaking investigations Middle Tennessee law enforcement had seen in years. Mya Fuller was known, by those who knew her, as someone deeply tied to her family. She was young, building a life, working, staying close to home in Murfreesboro, a city just southeast of Nashville. Like a lot of people her age, she also had a life that stretched into the city at night, friends, events, the kind of Saturday nights that end with texting your mom you're on your way home. On July 30, 2022, Mya worked an event connected to Nashville SC at Geodis Park, the soccer club's stadium in the city. It was, by all appearances, an ordinary day. Later that night, after her shift ended, she went to a nightclub called Island Vibes on Antioch Pike in Nashville. That is the last place anyone can confirm Mya Fuller was seen alive. She never came home. Her family did what families do when a daughter goes quiet. They called, they waited, they started to worry, and then they started to search. Her gray Toyota Camry was eventually found still parked at the nightclub, undisturbed. A car left behind is one of the most unsettling images in any missing persons case. It means a person got somewhere and something happened before they could leave the way they came. Mya was reported missing on July 29th by her family, and in the days that followed, that missing persons case would begin drawing in multiple agencies. The kind of coordinated response that signals investigators already suspected this was not a young woman who simply needed space. What prosecutors would only be able to lay out years later in charging documents and courtroom statements was a chain of events that had begun the night before Mya vanished, a night that had nothing to do with a stadium or a nightclub or a car in a parking lot. It had to do with an argument. According to prosecutors, Mya had a disagreement with a young woman named Tayana Tipton the night before Mya's death. It's not entirely clear from public records what that disagreement was about, but prosecutors say what happened next set the tragedy in motion. Tipton identified Mya to her brother, Tyshawn Bowles, and Bowles reached out to Mya on social media and invited her to a party. Mya said yes. It's the kind of small, ordinary decision that people make every day without a second thought. Say yes to a party, see what happens. There is nothing in that decision that suggests danger, and that is precisely what makes what prosecutors say happened next so difficult to sit with. After finishing her shift at Geodis Park, Mya went to the gathering, and according to the prosecution's account, it didn't take long for the night to turn. A confrontation broke out between Mya and Tipton. The disagreement from the night before hadn't been resolved. It had followed her here. That confrontation became physical. Mya was assaulted. And then, prosecutors say, it became something far beyond a fight. After the assault, Tipton put Mya inside the trunk of her own vehicle, not Mya's car, but Tipton's, and drove her out of Nashville toward a remote area of neighboring Wilson County. What happened at that location is the darkest chapter of this case. Investigators would later determine that Mya died from multiple gunshot wounds. Prosecutors allege that Tipton shot her 7 times on a piece of property that was, at the time, still in the early stages of development. Empty land, isolated, chosen, investigators would come to believe, because no one would be there to see or hear what happened. 7 shell casings were later recovered at the scene, matching, investigators said, the number of times Mya had been shot. For nearly a week, Mya Fuller's whereabouts remained a mystery to everyone outside of the people responsible for her death. Her family didn't know, the public didn't know. And then, on August 6, 2022, that silence broke not through a break in the investigation, but through chance. New property owners on Trammell Lane, in the southeastern part of Wilson County, had recently acquired the land. Walking the property, they noticed something off, an odor in the air that didn't belong, buzzards circling overhead. It's a detail that appears again and again in cases like this. Nature, in its own indifferent way, marking the place that human searchers hadn't yet reached. The property owners found a pair of shoes first, and then they found Mya's remains hidden in the wooded area. The young woman, who never came home from Island Vibes, had been just a few miles away the entire time. What followed was not a quick resolution. It was the beginning of a year-long investigation led by the Wilson County Sheriff's Office, alongside the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department. Detectives worked to piece together a timeline that spanned 2 counties, multiple people, and a crime scene that had already been exposed to the elements for days before it was found. Investigators leaned on the tools that modern cases increasingly depend on: surveillance footage, cell phone records, digital communication. As one detective involved in the case would later put it, publicly, evidence today rarely exists in isolation. Video, phone data, and digital footprints tend to corroborate each other or contradict a suspect's account in ways that simply weren't available to investigators a generation ago. Piece by piece, over the better part of a year, that digital and physical evidence pointed investigators toward 3 names. In July 2023, nearly 12 months after Mya's body was found, the Wilson County Sheriff's Office announced the arrests. Tayana Tipton, 21 years old, her brother, Tyshawn Bowles, 20 years old, and a third individual, an associate of the 2, Lamyra Pipkins, also 20 years old. Tipton was charged with first-degree murder, both premeditated and in the perpetration of a kidnapping, along with kidnapping and abuse of a corpse. Bowles faced first-degree murder and kidnapping-related charges as well, tied to his role in contacting Mya and, according to investigators, being present for the initial assault. Pipkins was charged with first-degree murder in the perpetration of a kidnapping and kidnapping. All 3 were held without bond. For nearly 2 more years, the case moved through the legal system, headed toward what would have been a jury trial. And then, in March of 2025, just days before that trial was set to begin, Tayana Tipton changed course. She pleaded guilty to all of the charges against her. It reportedly caught prosecutors off guard. The district attorney overseeing the case said the decision hadn't been communicated to his office ahead of time. They had been fully prepared to present the case to a jury the following week. Instead, in a Wilson County courtroom, with Mya's family present, Judge Brody Keynes sentenced Tipton to life in prison for first-degree premeditated murder and a second life sentence for felony first-degree murder, sentences that would ultimately be merged into one. 7 months later, in October 2025, Tyshawn Bowles entered his own plea not to murder, but to a lesser charge, facilitation of especially aggravated kidnapping. Prosecutors said the evidence showed Bowles had helped lure Mya to the gathering that night, and according to his own account, watched the initial assault and heard his sister give the instruction to open the trunk. But prosecutors said the evidence did not establish that he intended or directly participated in Mya's killing itself. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. The third defendant, Lamyra Pipkins, followed nearly a year later. According to later reporting, Pipkins pleaded guilty in March 2026, bringing the case to its final resolution: 3 defendants, 3 guilty pleas, and no jury trial ever required to determine what had happened to Mya Fuller. For the family who sat through those hearings, there was no version of justice that could undo what happened on that Wilson County property in the summer of 2022. But there was, at least, an answer, a confirmed account of what happened to their daughter and consequences for the people responsible. The district attorney who prosecuted the case would later call the investigation itself one of the most thorough he'd seen in his career. A testament, he said, to the work of the Wilson County Sheriff's Office, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and Metro Nashville Police, who spent a year turning a missing car in a nightclub parking lot into a fully built case against 3 people. What lingers about Mya Fuller's story isn't just the violence of what happened to her, it's how ordinary the night that led to it once looked. A shift at a soccer stadium, a stop at a nightclub with friends, an invitation to a party from someone she didn't know well. None of it, on its own, looked like danger. That is often the quiet, uncomfortable truth at the center of cases like this one, that the line between an unremarkable Saturday night and tragedy can be thinner and harder to see coming than anyone would like to believe. Mya Fuller was 22 years old. She worked events at a soccer stadium. She had a family who noticed, almost immediately, that something was wrong and who never stopped pushing for answers through a missing car, a wooded property in another county, and nearly 3 years of court proceedings. Her case is closed now. But it stands as a reminder of how much work, patience, and coordination it can take to bring a case like this to a resolution, and of the family still in Murfreesboro for whom this was never a case at all. It was their daughter.